who knew little or nothing of what I was brought over hither for, was well enough pleased with being here. London, a large and gay city, took with me mighty well, who, from my being a child, loved a crowd and to see a great many fine folks. I retained nothing of France but the language. My father and mother, being people of better fashion than ordinarily the people called refugees at that time were, and having fled early, while it was easy to secure their effects, had, before their coming over, remitted considerable sums of money, or, as I remember, a considerable value in French brandy, paper, and other goods, and these, selling very much to advantage here, my father was in very good circumstances at his coming over, so that he was far from applying to the rest of our nation that were here for countenance and relief. On the contrary, he had at his door continually thronged with miserable objects of the poor starving creatures who, at that time, fled hither for shelter on account of conscience or something else. I have indeed heard my father say that he was pestered with a great many of those who, for any religion they had, might e'en have stayed where they were, but who flocked over hither in droves for what they call in English a livelihood. Hearing with what open arms the refugees were received in England, and how they fell readily into business, being, by the charitable assistance of the people in London, encouraged to work in their manufactures, in Spitalfields, Canterbury, and other places, and that they had a much better price for their work than in France and the like. My father, I say, told me that he was more pestered with the clamours of these people than of those who were truly refugees and fled in distress, merely for conscience. I was about 10 years old when I was brought over hither, where, as I have said, my father lived in very good circumstances, and died in about 11 years more, in which time, as I had accomplished myself for the sociable part of the world, so I had acquainted myself with some of our English neighbours, as is the custom in London, and as, while I was young, I had picked up 3 or 4 playfellows and companions suitable to my years, so as we grew bigger, we learnt to call one another intimates and friends, and this forwarded very much the finishing me for conversation and the world. I went to English schools, and being young, I learnt the English tongue perfectly well, with all the customs of the English young women, so that I retained nothing of the French but the speech. Nor did I so much as keep any remains of the French language tagged to my way of speaking, as most foreigners do, but spoke what we call natural English, as if I had been born here. Being to give my own character, I must be excused to give it as impartially as possible, and as if I was speaking of another body, and the sequel will lead you to judge whether I flatter myself or no. I was, speaking of myself as about 14 years of age, tall and very well made, sharp as a hawk in matters of common knowledge, quick and smart in discourse, apt to be satirical, full of repartee, and a little too forward in conversation, or, as we call it in English, bold, though perfectly modest in my behaviour. Being French-born, I danced, as some say, naturally, loved it extremely, and sung well also, and so well that, as you will hear, it was afterwards some advantage to me. With all these things, I wanted neither wit, beauty, or money. In this manner I set out into the world, having all the advantages that any young woman could desire, to recommend me to others and form a prospect of happy living to myself. At about 15 years of age, my father gave